Kang Ji-hoon had calculated everything about that evening. The announcement would begin at 7, 300 guests. One merger wrapped in arranged smiles. He had reviewed the logistics 4 times and found nothing unexpected. He was wrong about that last part.
Right over the fence.
At 5:41 p.m., on the 12th floor of the Ashford Grand, he passed 3 little girls doing homework on a marble bench near the service elevator. He wasn't watching them. Then the smallest one swept her left hand through the air in a slow, specific arc while explaining something specific something to her sister. A gesture of emphasis Ji-hoon had made in 100 boardrooms and never once taught to anyone. He stopped. The middle girl had a sketchbook open on her lap. The face on the page, drawn in pencil, drawn from memory, was his. His jaw, the open collar, the way his eyes looked before anything had gone wrong. 7 years younger, unmistakably his. The smallest girl looked up. "Are you the man in Maya's drawings? She draws you all the..." The oldest one grabbed her arm. Too late. "Before I tell you how 3 little girls and a worn-out sketchbook turned Kang Ji-hoon's most calculated evening into the most important night of his life, I want to ask you something. As if you found out, 7 years after the fact, that you and someone you loved had both been grieving the exact same loss. Opposite sides. From opposite sides of the same silence. Would you be brave enough to close that distance? Or would you protect yourself from being broken a second time? Tell me where you're watching from right now. And what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're drawn to stories about the kind of courage it takes to choose truth over comfort, about love that finds its way back through the most unexpected hands, subscribe now. Because what happens next is something neither you nor Kang Ji-hoon could have calculated. The 34th floor ballroom of the Ashford Grand had been dressed for the occasion since 3 that afternoon. 280 guests. Flower arrangements that cost more per table than most families spent on groceries in a month. A lectern positioned exactly 11 feet from the front row because Ji-hoon's an event coordinator had learned, after 2 years of working for him, that he measured things like that and noticed when they were off. Marcus Lee met him outside the elevator at 4:53 p.m., tablet already open. The Chen family arrived at 4:41. Stairs. Victoria's in suite 3407 with her parents. They're asking if you want to meet before the announcement.
Meh.
Ji-hoon straightened the cuff of his jacket. Charcoal gray, tailored to sit flat across shoulders that had learned, over 34 years, to carry weight without showing it. Tell them 6:30. You have 37 minutes, sir. I know. Give me 30 first. Marcus hesitated the way he always did when he had something to say. He had already decided not to say. Then he nodded and turned away. Ji-hoon took the elevator down to the 12th floor, not for any reason he could name clearly. He had done this before major events for years, found the lowest occupied level of whatever building he was in and walked through it once. How? His grandfather had told him that powerful men stay sharp by remembering what ground level looks like. At 34, Ji-hoon was still deciding whether that was wisdom or superstition. Tonight, it was something else entirely. 3 girls in Navy school uniforms sat on the marble bench near the service elevator. Backpacks stacked with the particular neatness of children who had been told more than once to stop leaving their things across the floor. The smallest one was in the middle of explaining something to her sisters, one finger extended, using her left hand to draw a slow, deliberate arc through the air to emphasize her point. Ji-hoon's steps slowed without his permission. He knew that gesture, had been making it since before he could drive, a slow leftward sweep whenever he wanted to land something important. 3 executive coaches over the years had tried to train it out of his presentations. He had kept it every time. No one had taught it to him. He had simply, since childhood, done it. No one in his family did the same. He stopped walking. The girl in the middle had a sketchbook open across her lap. She hadn't looked up. Her pencil moved in short, certain strokes, the unself-conscious way someone draws when they're not trying to impress anyone. On the open page, a man's face. Sharp jaw, open collar, eyes looking past the left edge of the page with an expression that had nothing to do with the girl's imagination. Because she didn't have an imagination for that face. She had a reference. His face, 7 years younger, drawn from a photograph her mother thought was hidden. The smallest girl looked up and found him staring. Are you the man in Maya's drawings? She draws you all the oldest one caught her arm. Lily. Time, Lily finished, already committed to the sentence and entirely unrepentant about it. Ji-hoon crouched down slowly, the kind of slow that doesn't frighten things. I'm Ji-hoon. What are your names? Zoe Cole. The oldest delivered this like a briefing. Oldest by 7 minutes. That still counts, Maya glanced up once, nodded without expression, and returned to the sketchbook. That's Maya, Lily said cheerfully, accepting responsibility for her sister's social participation the way someone accepts a standing obligation. She draws instead of talking. I'm Lily. I'm the youngest, but I'm also the loudest, so it balances out. Where's your mother? Zoe's eyes did something careful and measuring. She's working. She's the best event supervisor in this entire hotel. A pause that felt like a warning. You can't bother her. Ji-hoon looked down at the sketchbook still open in his hands. He turned back one page. The drawing before the portrait showed a man standing outside a building, 3 small girls beside him. The Sioux, their hands connected. A lit window behind them. The lines were as confident as the portrait. No hesitation, no second guessing. Maya had drawn them together with the certainty of someone depicting something she had already accepted as true. She had drawn this before they had ever met. He set the sketchbook down carefully, stood, and went to find their mother. He heard it before he saw it. A particular quiet gathers in a hallway when someone is being shouted at and has decided not to shout back. Ji-hoon followed it around the corner into the service corridor off the catering station and stopped. A man in a guest badge and an expensive watch was standing too close to a young woman in a catering uniform. First month on the job, by the way she was holding herself. He was explaining to her, in considerable detail, exactly what she had failed to do correctly. The young woman's hands had found each other behind her back. But a second woman stood between them. Ji-hoon's woman stood between them. Ji-hoon saw her spine where he saw her face. She was positioned with the particular stillness of someone who has learned how to hold their ground without giving the other person a reason to escalate. Her voice, when she spoke, was level in a way that required more effort than anger would have. Sir, I need you to direct all complaints through the event coordinator. Right now. Not a request. Not a warning. A fact. The man started again. She didn't move a degree. I understand your frustration. The coordinator's desk is at the end of this hall. I'll walk you there myself if that helps. Ji-hoon recognized her before she turned around. Not her face. The way she stood under pressure without losing a single degree of herself doing it. He had seen her stand exactly that way across 4 years and a dozen difficult rooms, and it had been 7 years since then, and she was so entirely herself still that something in his chest did something inconvenient and unwelcome. She told the young woman quietly, "You're okay? Go." Then she turned and found Ji-hoon at the far end of the corridor. Her hands, which had been loosely clasped in front of her, went very still. Not fear, something more deliberate than fear. The expression of a woman who has just run a calculation and arrived at an answer she wasn't ready to use. 3 seconds. She walked toward the staff exit. Naomi. She didn't stop. He fell into step beside her, not blocking her, not reaching for her, the way you follow someone when you understand that blocking and reaching are the wrong tools. 7 years. I'm asking him for one thing. 1. You understood everything 7 years ago. Her voice was controlled in a way that had been prepared before tonight. Your people made the decision. It was very clear. My people, Ji-hoon said. Something shifted in the 2 words that she chose not to turn around to answer. She found her daughters at the marble bench, gathered them with the practiced speed of a woman who had moved fast with 3 children for 8 years, and pushed through the staff exit. A cab was at the corner in under 90 seconds. The girls climbed in. Naomi followed. The door was nearly closed when Lily pressed her small palm flat against the rear window. Not waving, not asking for anything. just placing her hand against the glass and looking back at Ji-hoon standing on the other side of the hotel door. 1 second. The cab turned onto North Michigan Avenue and was gone. Ji-hoon went upstairs at 6:23 p.m. Victoria Chen Hunt was already in the pre-function room with her parents and their family attorney. She wore the deliberate elegance of a woman who had prepared for this evening the way she prepared for every transaction. Thoroughly, without sentiment. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had already calculated the evening's outcome and was ready to proceed. "Cancel the announcement," Ji-hoon said. The room found a specific kind of quiet. "I'll have Marcus contact your team about next steps. Tonight is not happening." He said it the way he had learned to say things he had already decided, not cruelly, not apologetically, simply as a fact that had stopped being a choice. Victoria Chen said nothing. Her father said several things. Ji-hoon heard them all and left. By 11:47 p.m., the 34th floor was being quietly dismantled. Flower arrangements that had cost $14,300 were heading for black garbage bags. 280 people had received a terse message about a postponed announcement pending scheduling adjustments. Ji-hoon sat at the desk in his penthouse office. The city spread below the floor-to-ceiling windows. He set down the pen he had been holding since 10 o'clock without having written anything with it. "Marcus." "Sir." "Naomi Cole, event supervisor, Ashford Grand, as of today." A pause that had the weight of 7 years in it, everything. 3 days after the canceled engagement, Marcus set a folder on Ji-hoon's desk without a word. Ji-hoon opened it. Mamic. Naomi Cole. 31. Originally Atlanta, Georgia. Event supervisor at the Ashford Grand for 2 years and 4 months, until the morning after the engagement cancellation, when the VIP client she had shielded a junior staff member from filed a formal complaint. The client's name appeared in Kang Group's own records as a secondary partner in two of the Chen family's Chicago real estate holdings. She hadn't touched anything that belonged to them. She had simply refused to let a man with power use it badly in front of her. They had gotten her fired for it anyway. She was 2 months behind on rent at a Pilsen apartment. The landlord had filed the early lock paperwork 41 hours ago, 12 hours before the notice period was legally required to expire. Current address, unknown. Emergency contact field, blank. Ji-hoon read that last line twice. He closed the folder and sat with both palms flat on the desk. Then he asked Marcus front of a diner within walking distance of Naomi's last known address that stayed open past midnight. He found her at 1:47 a.m. at a place called Loretta's on South Halsted. The kind of diner that hadn't changed its menu or its lighting in 20 years. Both decisions were correct. 3 girls were asleep in the booth beside her. Zoe upright with her arms crossed. Even in sleep, Maya slumped against the window with the sketchbook still loosely in her hand. Lily sprawled diagonally across both of them at an angle that suggested she had negotiated for more space and won without waking anyone but Alec. Naomi sat across from the girls with a coffee she wasn't drinking, both hands wrapped around the mug like warmth was the only thing she was asking it for. Ji-hoon slid into the seat across from her without asking. She looked at him the way someone looks at a problem they have been trying not to think about for 3 days. "I don't need whatever this is. I have a 3-bedroom in Streeterville. Empty since March. Good school district." He named the specific school. Marcus had found it. "I don't need your." "They do," he said it once and left it there. Naomi looked at her daughters. Zoe's arm still crossed in sleep. Lily's hand hanging off the seat edge. Maya's fingers still holding the sketchbook. The silence was long enough to become a decision. "For them," she said finally. "To the table, not to him. Not for you. You are nothing official yet." "Understood." She looked up at that. Perhaps because he said it without qualification, without asking what official meant, without negotiating what she had just conceded. "Understood," he said again. He meant it. She could tell. She hated slightly that she could still tell. The apartment had 5 windows that caught the morning light, and enough kitchen cabinet space that Zoe completed a full inspection lap before declaring it acceptable. Naomi refused the car. Ji-hoon offered. She refused the driver, abused. She accepted that he would occasionally appear before school with coffee and 3 pastries from the Beacon Street Bakery, 2 blocks north, because Zoe, Maya, and Lily had 3 different opinions about which pastry was correct, and all 3 of them were wrong about the other 2. And Ji-hoon had learned this within the first 4 days and started rotating accordingly. The girls conducted their assessment of him by their own criteria, without consulting anyone. Zoe administered the hand-holding test at the crosswalk on Fairbanks Court without warning. She simply took his hand as they stepped off the curb, measured the grip for half a block, and released it on the other side without comment. Whatever verdict she reached went into a private ledger. He would learn the score over time. Lily operated on different logic entirely. She began treating him as a feature of the household that had simply always been there, the way children accept things that make emotional sense before they ever make logical sense. She asked him questions constantly and without filter. Favorite color, whether pigeons were underrated, why adults carried briefcases when backpacks were objectively superior engineering. He answered all of them. Maya watched. She didn't speak to him directly for 9 days. On the 10th morning, he arrived to find a folded piece of paper tucked under the pastry bag he had left at the door the night before. The Streeterville building. Their building. Drawn in careful pencil. 3 girls visible in the windows. A figure standing at the open front door. The figure was him. Maya had drawn him into their home before Naomi had decided whether to let him stay. Ji-hoon stood alone in the hallway holding the drawing for a moment. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket, where it stayed for the rest of the day. 3 weeks in, Lily sat him down at the kitchen table for a formal lesson. "You do this wrong," she announced, demonstrating the left-hand sweep with the gravity of someone correcting an error that had gone on too long. "You go like this. The arc drifted too far right, but it should go like this." The corrected version was, to any objective measurement, identical to the original. "I do it like this," Ji-hoon said and showed her. Lily frowned with scientific seriousness, performed both versions twice, then looked up. "Oh, a pause. We do it the same way. A longer pause. That's called a gene, I think. That's one theory. I have a lot of theories." She swept the arc a 3rd time, satisfied. "Maya says I should write them down. I think I should just tell people." Ji-hoon laughed. Not a boardroom laugh. Something from further back than that. From somewhere that hadn't been opened in a while. The sound surprised him. Slightly. Naomi, standing in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel, heard it. She looked away before he could turn around. It was 4 weeks after the move when Ji-hoon stayed past 11 without a reason. The girls had been asleep for an hour. The apartment held a particular quiet of a home where children had recently been very loud. He was still at the kitchen table, and neither of them had mentioned the time. Naomi poured 2 coffees without asking. They talked about the girls for a while. Then that conversation ended naturally, and neither of them reached for another comfortable one. He told her what he had believed happened 7 years ago, that she had simply left, that he had looked for a while, that he had eventually stopped because the looking became its own kind of damage. He said it without asking anything from it. Just the record. Just the record. Naomi held her mug with both hands. "I was told you had signed an internal directive. That I had been classified as," she chose the words carefully even now, "a personal liability. That the decision came from you." She looked at the table. "I believed it because I didn't want to believe it, which is not the same thing as it being true." "I never signed anything like that." She looked at him. "I never signed anything like that," he said again, not to persuade her, because it was accurate and the record deserved it. The coffee cooled between them on the table. Ji-hoon looked down at his hands. Naomi looked out the window at the city. And somewhere inside the silence, without announcement, something arrived that neither of them named. The specific, unwelcome weight of 2 people realizing they had been describing the same 7-year absence from opposite sides of it. He left at 12:23 a.m. She stood at the window for a long time after the elevator doors closed. The next morning, Naomi made a call she didn't mention to Ji-hoon. A woman named Deborah Park, Korean-American, near North Side, spent a decade moving in circles adjacent to organizations like the Kang World without ever being inside one. She knew people. She owed Naomi a conversation from 3 years back that had never happened. Naomi called it in. She didn't tell Ji-hoon. Some truths, she had decided somewhere around 1 a.m. at that window, have to be found by the person who needs them most. Not handed over. Not delivered. Found. She had 3 daughters carrying a man's left-hand gesture in their hands since birth. She needed to know whose name had actually been on that directive. She needed to know it for herself, not because anyone had asked her to. 2 days later, Ji-hoon requested a DNA test. A formality, he said. Nothing changes either way. She agreed. She did not tell him she was already 3 calls deep into something a laboratory could not answer. Deborah Park met her at a coffee shop on West Huron Street, a Tuesday morning while the girls were at school. She was a careful woman. The kind who arrived early to pick the seat facing the door and kept her answers 2 layers back from what she actually knew until she was sure about who was asking. Naomi let her find that certainty at her own pace. She had not come to push. She had come because a closed room needed someone to open a window, and she was done waiting for someone else to reach for it. By the end of the second coffee, Deborah had given her a name, Hyun Park, no relation. A former records administrator for a Kang Group subsidiary, let go 4 years ago when a department was restructured. He was living in Oak Park. He had spent the last 4 years being very quiet about things he knew, but he had also spent the last 4 years being quietly angry about them, which was a different thing entirely. Naomi met him on a Thursday afternoon. It took him 12 minutes to confirm what she had already half-constructed in her own mind and 2 more minutes to show her the document. An internal security directive dated 7 years ago. Her name. A classification order. Her name. A signature block that did not belong to Ji-hoon. Park Yoon, he's senior advisor, Kang Group Operations. Signature as precise and controlled as the woman it belonged to. Naomi drove to Lincoln Park that same afternoon. She had found the address through Deborah. She had not told Ji-hoon. She had thought about it on the drive and decided that she needed to walk into this room as herself. Not as the woman someone had come to rescue, not as someone's evidence. As the person who had spent 7 years living the consequences of a decision she hadn't been consulted on. Park Yoon-hee opened the door as though she had been expecting this visit for some time. She was elegant in the way of women who have made a discipline of their appearance for decades. Not for vanity, but because control was the only language she fully trusted. She looked at Naomi for a long moment before stepping aside to let her in. Naomi placed the document on the table between them. Yoon-hee looked at it. She didn't reach for it. You found that yourself? Not a question. Yes. The older woman was quiet for a moment. He didn't know, she said. He never signed anything. I want you to understand that clearly. I understand it. Naomi kept her voice flat and even. What I need to understand is whether the interference stopped there. Yoon-hee met her eyes across the table. The DNA results, Naomi said, the chain of custody before processing. The silence lasted long enough to answer the question before any words did. I had a contact in the laboratory, Yoon-hee said finally. The results you and Ji-hoon received were not the results the science produced. Naomi sat with that for a moment, felt it settle into the part of her that had already known, the part she had chosen not to listen to when she read that negative result 9 days ago and felt something she wasn't proud of. Relief. Not happiness, not peace. The specific, quiet relief of a woman who had been afraid of the truth for 8 years and found a door she was not required to open. I'm going to need everything you have, Naomi said. The contact's name, the documentation, everything. Yoon-hee nodded once. Why are you giving this to me? Naomi asked. I'm not giving it to you, Yoon-hee said. You came and took it. Naomi stood. She did not thank her. There was nothing to thank her for. She drove home and sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes before going upstairs to start dinner. She didn't tell Ji-hoon yet. She needed the full picture in her hands first. The DNA results arrived 4 days later. Ji-hoon received them at his office at 9:14 a.m. He read the paper once, turned it over as if there might be something clarifying on the back, turned it face up again. Not a biological match. He set it on the desk and stared at it for a long time. Then he thought about Lily's left hand sweeping that arc through the air. He thought about the way Zoe set her jaw when she was refusing to concede a point, a specific angle, a specific stillness that he had seen in his own reflection more times than he could count. He thought about Maya's sketchbook before she had spoken a word to him directly. He picked up the phone. Marcus. The lab. Get me the supervisor's name, the technician's name, and a full chain of custody record for the submission. Then he told her the result without framing. Then he called Naomi. Does it change anything for you? A pause on her end. No. The word was flat in the way that words are when there's something heavier than no behind them. Then it doesn't for me either, he said. He meant it. She already knew what she knew. She needed 2 more days to have the full documentation. That same week, Ji-hoon sat in a room in the Kang Group's River North offices that contained 5 men who had known him since before he was old enough to be making decisions about his own life. One of them said what several of them were thinking in the careful language of men who understood implication. The engagement collapse had created instability. The arrival of the woman and the children had created more. Certain partners were asking questions about commitment and distraction. Certain arrangements were contingent on a perception of stability. Ji-hoon listened until the man finished. The arrangements change, Ji-hoon said. Everything that can't survive in a legitimate structure ends in the next 18 months. All of it. That's what's happening. The room found a specific kind of silence. The partners can ask their questions. The answers will be the same ones. He stood. The meeting was over. On his way out, alone in the elevator, he pressed both palms against the metal doors and exhaled the way you exhale after a decision you've been circling for 3 years has finally been said out loud. It was done now. There was a cost attached to it that no number would fully cover. Some of the men in that room would never forgive him. Some of the structures he dismantled would take people down with them who had trusted those structures their entire working lives. Ask it. He had known all of that coming in. He had said it anyway. The photograph ran on a Thursday morning, a long-lens shot. Ji-hoon on the sidewalk outside Lily's school, Lily on his left shoulder, Zoe and Maya walking ahead with their backpacks. His hand raised slightly, saying something to one of the girls. Entirely ordinary. Entirely damning in the particular way that ordinary things are when they answer a question 300,000 people had been quietly asking for 2 weeks. The Kang here's secret daughters, the broken engagement finally explained. The girls came home from school and didn't mention it. Zoe had apparently informed the 2 classmates who brought it up that the topic was not open for discussion, and then gone back to her math worksheet with an expression that had reportedly ended the conversation permanently. Maya said nothing. She drew. The sketch took her less than 20 minutes. 3 girls standing in front of a newsstand. The front page just visible at the edge of the frame. But none of them were looking at it. They were looking at each other. Ji-hoon found it on the kitchen counter that evening and stood there longer than he meant to. Victoria Chen arrived at the Streeterville building at 11:13 a.m. on a Friday. She came alone. No attorney. A folder under one arm and the specific composure of a woman who had calculated every variable in the room before entering it. She sat across from Naomi in the living room. The girls were at school and opened the folder to a figure that would have resolved every financial problem in Naomi's immediate life, and several she hadn't anticipated yet. But I want to be direct with you, Victoria said. I'm not asking you to give up your daughter's future. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about what a woman in your position, with your background, your history, and 3 children with no legal father on record, can realistically offer them inside a family like ours. The room was very quiet. Naomi looked at the folder for exactly as long as it took to confirm she had understood the number correctly. Then she stood up, crossed to the apartment door, and opened it. My daughters are watching how I handle this moment. Her voice was level, not cold, not performing, simply certain. I won't let them see me negotiate my dignity. She held the door. Tim Alec. Victoria Chen left without picking the folder up from the coffee table. Naomi closed the door, stood with her back against it. Then she went to the kitchen, picked up her phone, and made the call she had been building toward for 11 days. She had the documentation. She had the name of the lab contact. She had Hyun Park's statement and the directive with Yoon Hee's signature. She called Ji-hoon. I need to tell you something. I found it myself, all of it. And I need you to hear it from me. Ji-hoon was still at his desk when the call came through. He let it ring once. One ring longer than usual, because he had been waiting for it in the way you wait for something when you know it's coming but still have no idea what shape it will take when it arrives. I found it myself, Naomi said. No preamble. All of it, and I need you to hear it from me. Not from anyone else. From me. He was at the Streeterville building in 19 minutes. She had laid everything on the kitchen table. The internal directive with Yoon Hee's signature, dated 7 years ago. Hyun Park's written and signed statement. The lab contact's name. Documentation of the chain of custody breach that had produced the result they had both received and neither had fully believed. Ji-hoon stood at the table and read through it without interrupting her once. When she finished, he said, You did this yourself. I needed to know it for myself. Not apologetic. Simply precise. Not as something you gave me. Not as something that was handed over. He looked at her across the table. Something moved through his expression that he didn't bother to contain. Then his phone rang. Zoe and Maya had been collected at the regular time. Lily had signed up for an after-school reading session ending at 4:30. At 4:31, when the aide went to collect her for the carpool line, Lily was already gone. A staff member at the front desk recalled a family member arriving early. An older Korean woman, elegant, who had known Lily's full name and birthday without being asked. Naomi's chair scraped back before Ji-hoon finished the call. Lincoln Park, he said, moving already. The calculation had run before he could stop it. Yoon-hee had one place. She would take a child she was trying to do right by. One reason to have acted today, of all days. My grandfather has been asking to meet them for weeks. She made the decision without telling anyone. He was at the door. Again. They drove together. Naomi's hands flat on her thighs the entire way. The kind of silence that converts terror into forward momentum because forward momentum is the only useful thing terror can become. Yoon-hee opened the door on Orchard Street before Ji-hoon finished knocking. Behind her, from somewhere deeper in the house, Lily's voice, 3 is Sam. No, Harabuji, say it back to me. Sam. A pause. Then an old man's voice, slower, careful, Sam. Lily immediately, yes. Now 4. Naomi closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she walked inside. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor of the sitting room beside an armchair where a man of 81 rested with a blanket across his lap. His expression was one Ji-hoon had not seen on his grandfather's face in several years. The expression of a person genuinely engaged with something, without effort, without the performance of interest that long illness sometimes requires. Kang Byung-soo looked up and found Ji-hoon's face. Something in his eyes said he had been waiting for a version of this moment for longer than anyone had thought to ask. Lily scrambled to her feet. Mom, I taught him 4 numbers. And I taught him purple, but he says it funny. Harabuji, say purple. Say purple. The old man looked at Lily with the patience of someone who has discovered, late in life, that he enjoys being corrected. He said the word in the specific way of an 81-year-old Korean man who has known it for 45 minutes. Lily pressed both hands over her mouth. That's so good, she said, voice shaking with restrained delight. That's so good. Naomi crossed the room without a word and gathered her daughter. Her hands were steadier than they had any right to be. Yoon-hee stood in the hallway doorway. She had not moved since they entered. Ji-hoon looked at her. He didn't speak. He asked to meet them, she said. He has been asking since he found out. I made the decision without consulting anyone. I understand what that is. Tell me, Ji-hoon said. Quiet. Entirely quiet, in the way that is the opposite of harmless. All of it. Here, she told them. The directive 7 years ago. Her fabrication of it. The reasoning she had named protection and used as permission. The laboratory. The chain of custody. The result she had engineered for 2 people who had never asked her to engineer anything. And then, because Ji-hoon had said all of it, and because his grandfather was watching from the armchair with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting 19 years for a specific sentence to finally be spoken, she told the rest. Ji-hoon's father had loved a woman outside the organization. A private thing, in a different life. Unremarkable. Rivals found out. They took the woman as leverage. A ransom demand arrived. A choice between the woman and the organization. It had arrived on a night when Ji-hoon's father was unreachable. Yoon-hee had made a decision she told herself was tactical. She had been 29 years old and completely certain she was correct. Ji-hoon's father had died anyway. The woman had also been lost. Yoon-hee had carried the full accounting of both outcomes for 19 years without telling anyone who didn't already know. I drove Naomi away because I had watched love give someone a weapon they used against everything your father had built, she said. She was not looking at Ji-hoon. She was looking at a point on the floor slightly to his left. I told myself I was protecting you. A pause. I had no right to make that decision. I understood that at the time. I made it anyway. Ji-hoon stood in the middle of the room without speaking. His grandfather's voice from the armchair was not loud. Ji-hoon. Ah! The old man looked at him across the room steadily. She was wrong. She has been wrong about this since the beginning. And she is also the woman who drove 3 hours through a February snowstorm to sit beside your bed when you were 12 years old, and I was in surgery and could not come to you myself. Both things are true. They will always both be true. The room held that for a long moment. Lily, who had been watching the adults with the careful attention of a child who understands weight without understanding detail, reached over and took her great-grandfather's hand. He looked down at her small hand in his. He did not look up again for some time. They sat on the front steps afterward. Ji-hoon and Naomi. While inside, Lily taught Kang Byung-soo the word for purple a second time, slower, and Yoon-hee sat in the kitchen with her hands around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. The October air was cold and clean. Their shoulders were touching. Neither of them moved away. The silence between them was not waiting for anything. She made a decision for everyone from a place of fear, Naomi said eventually. Not to him specifically, the way you say something when you are finally ready to hear it yourself. So did I. Ji-hoon turned slightly. I read that negative result and chose not to push back. Part of me decided to believe it because the alternative was harder to carry. I made a choice about your place in their lives without consulting you. From the same place she made hers. She stopped. The only difference between us is she had 19 years to live with it. I had 9 days. You went and found the truth yourself, Ji-hoon said. That is not the same as staying in the lie. A long pause. It's closer than I'd like. He didn't argue. He understood why she needed to say it exactly that way. After a while, Lily fell asleep against Naomi's shoulder on the steps, one hand still loosely holding a small piece of paper. The old man's handwriting on it? Hanerl. Sky. Their word. 45 minutes old. Already the kind of thing that outlasts the people who made it. Ji-hoon looked at the two of them from the corner of his eye. The way you look at something when you know you are going to remember it precisely, in every detail, for the rest of your life. He had spent a decade building things that couldn't be touched. He had never in his life felt as certain about anything as he did on those steps, shoulder to shoulder with a woman who had gone looking for the truth herself. And brought it back anyway. Maya's drawing that evening was the last she completed before the sketchbook ran out of pages. She drew from memory, as always. The old man in the armchair, Lily on the floor beside him, one hand in his, the other raised mid-arc, making a point, making him laugh. The lamp in the corner casting warm yellow light across both of them, an expression on the old man's face that had no word, so she drew it instead. She drew it exactly right. Tech. The Chen family's lawsuit was filed on a Monday and settled on a Thursday 5 weeks later for $12.4 million. Ji-hoon signed the transfer without reading it twice. The number was accurate and the alternative, a prolonged legal process that kept Victoria Chen's name attached to his daughter's story, was not acceptable at any price. What the settlement didn't cover, and no settlement could, was the second cost. 3 weeks after the night on Orchard Street, Ji-hoon sat in a federal building on West Jackson Boulevard across a table from 2 investigators who had been building a file on Kang Group operations for 4 years. He had arranged the meeting himself through counsel without being asked. He answered every question they had, and several they hadn't thought to ask. He named structures, transactions, and arrangements that had been the architecture of his adult life since he was 24 years old. Some of the men whose names he gave had known him since before he was old enough to make his own decisions. Some of them would not forgive him. He had understood that walking in. He had walked in anyway. The cooperation agreement took 11 months to finalize. During those 11 months, Ji-hoon restructured the Kang Group piece by piece. Real estate holdings, hospitality contracts, a technology division that Marcus had been quietly building for 2 years in anticipation of exactly this moment. The infrastructure of the old world came apart in the careful, undramatic way that things come apart when the person dismantling them has decided there is no version of this where they change their mind. He had never, in 34 years, slept without one part of himself remaining alert. The first night he slept all the way through, he didn't realize it until morning. The independent laboratory confirmed what 3 8-year-old girls had known in their bones since before they had words for it. Kang Ji-hoon was the biological father of Zoe, Maya, and Lily Cole. The paternity registration took effect on a Tuesday. 3 weeks later, the school directory listed them, at Zoe's request, as Cole Kang. Maya had no comment on the hyphen. Lily announced that it was good, because now her name took longer to write, which was more impressive. Park Yoon-hee attended the first family therapy session without being asked twice. She attended every session after that without being asked at all. She learned Zoe's preferred pastry without being told a second time. She learned that Maya communicated primarily through drawings, and that the way to earn her trust was to look at them seriously when they were offered, without performing a reaction. She learned that Lily would tell her everything that had happened in the past week if given an opening of more than 30 seconds, and that this was both a gift and a responsibility. After 4 months, Lily asked if Yoon-hee wanted to learn more English words for colors. Yoon-hee said yes, they started with gold. Kang, Young-soo passed on a quiet morning in February, 5 months after the evening on Orchard Street. He had met his great-granddaughters 4 more times after that first evening. He had learned purple and sky and Tuesday, and the specific way Lily's left hand moved when she was making a point she considered important. He had taught her Hanul and Bora, and the word for grandfather in three different levels of formality, which she practiced on the drive home on time with declining accuracy and increasing volume. He died knowing their names. He died knowing the word for purple. That was enough. The proposal happened on a Saturday afternoon in March. Ji-hoon came home to find the apartment very quiet in a way that was specifically not the absence of activity, but the presence of something being carefully managed. A folded note was taped to the front door. Maya's handwriting, neat and unhurried. Go to the kitchen. In the kitchen, beneath the fruit bowl, a second note in Lily's handwriting, accompanied by a drawing of a person with an arrow pointing right. In case the words weren't sufficient, look under the sink. Under the sink, a third note in Zoe's handwriting. which was direct and entirely undecorated, except for a single emphatic exclamation mark she had added in red pen. Living room. Please. In the living room, 3 girls stood in their best dresses with the gravity of people conducting an official proceeding. Zoe held the ring box. See it? She had spent 40 minutes with Marcus at the jewelry counter 2 Saturdays ago, which Marcus had later described as the most efficiently completed purchase of his professional career. Maya held a card she had drawn herself. A house with 5 figures in front, a lit window, light coming from inside in a way she had made look warm without any instruction on how. Lily stood in the center of the room and swept her left hand through the air in a formal arc. The gesture she had been making her whole life, the one that had stopped a man in a hotel corridor 8 months ago and started everything. Naomi Cole, who is also Mom. Just say it, Lily, Zoe said. Will you marry our dad? Ji-hoon stepped out from the hallway where he had been waiting since before Naomi came home. No photographer, no audience. He was already on one knee before Lily finished the sentence, and Naomi was already laughing before he reached the floor. Yes, she said before he managed the question. Yes, obviously yes. Lily punched. The air. They were married on a Saturday in late October at the Chicago Botanic Garden, in the late afternoon when the light came in at an angle that made everything it touched look like it had always been exactly where it was. 45 guests. No press. Naomi wore ivory with clean lines and nothing unnecessary. Ji-hoon wore black, collar open enough to show the edge of the ink along his neck. Not hidden, not displayed, simply part of him the way it had always been. The 3 girls served as flower girls and remained composed for the entirety of the ceremony except for 2 moments, when Lily deposited the entire contents of her basket in one concentrated area near the altar because, she explained afterward, it looked like the right spot, and when Maya paused the processional to show the efficient a pencil diagram she had drawn of the ceremony layout, which she felt was more spatially efficient than the current arrangement. See, this efficient studied it seriously. The guests laughed through tears. Ji-hoon and Naomi exchanged vows in the specific language of 2 people who had already done the hard work and were now simply saying, out loud, what had already been true for some time. 4 years moved through them the way good years do. Not slowly, not quickly, but fully. Naomi opened Cerise Catering 18 months after the wedding. 14 staff members. Contracts with 4 Chicago hotels. Alec. The Ashford Grand was the last contract she signed. In the same building. At a table she specifically requested. In a room where a different version of her had once stood with her spine straight and her voice level, and refused to let a man with power use it badly. She signed her name at the bottom and moved on to the next item on the agenda. Ji-hoon's transition completed in the 3rd year. The Kang Group's holdings were entirely legitimate by the time the cooperation agreement closed. Real estate, hospitality, a technology division that was beginning to show the kind of returns that made patient people look prescient. He sat board meetings and answered to a governance structure and filed quarterly reports with regulatory bodies, and none of it was what his 24-year-old self had imagined his life becoming. He found he didn't miss the other version at all. Balk. Zoe, at 12, won the regional under-14 jiu-jitsu championship and managed her school's student council with the operational efficiency of someone twice her age. Her coach had taken Ji-hoon aside after the regional final and said carefully that Zoe had the kind of focus you couldn't teach and didn't want to interrupt. Ji-hoon had nodded and said he knew. Alec, Maya's drawing of Kang Byung-soo, and Lily, the old man in the armchair. Lily's hand raised mid-arc, the lamp casting its specific yellow warmth, was selected for the Chicago Art Institute Youth Fellowship exhibition. Maya attended the opening in a dress she had chosen herself and stood in front of the framed piece for a while without saying anything. When Ji-hoon asked her what she was thinking, she said she thought she had gotten the light right. He agreed that she had. Lily launched a school podcast called Things Nobody Asked About But Should Have, It had 3,400 listeners by the end of the first semester, the majority of whom were adults who had found it by accident and stayed on purpose. A son arrived. In the second year, they named him Byung-soo. The three sisters called him Boo before he was 48 hours old, and the name settled permanently over Ji-hoon's mild and entirely symbolic objection. Boo grew into a child of steady temperament and enormous curiosity who followed his sisters through the apartment from the moment he could walk, studying everything they did, with the specific attention of someone taking notes for future use. On an evening in early December, 4 years after the wedding, the family had dinner together at the long table Ji-hoon had bought specifically because it was large enough for everyone. Lily was telling a story. She had been telling it for several minutes already. Something that had happened at school, a disagreement between two teachers about the correct way to classify a historical event which Lily had strong opinions about and was conveying with considerable energy. Her left hand swept through the air mid-sentence in a slow, deliberate arc. At the other end of the table, Ji-hoon was saying something to Marcus Lee, who had been invited to dinner with enough regularity that he had stopped bringing wine as an apology for arriving. Ji-hoon's left hand moved as he made a point. The same arc, the same pace, the same gesture from the same place neither of them had ever been taught, made at the same moment at opposite ends of the same table. Neither of them noticed. Maya noticed. She reached below her chair and lifted the new sketchbook she had started 3 months ago. The old one lived on a shelf in her room now, full, every page documented. She opened to a clean page, uncapped her pencil, looked at the table. Lily still talking, Ji-hoon still listening to Marcus, Boo stealing the last piece of bread while everyone was looking elsewhere, Zoe already aware of the theft and choosing not to intervene, Naomi watching all of it from her chair with an expression that had no single name. Maya began to draw. Nobody asked what she was drawing. They already knew. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Which moment stayed with you the longest? Was it the hotel corridor? A man stopping in his tracks because a little girl moved her hand the way he had moved his since before he could remember? Was it Maya, drawing a family into her sketchbook before anyone else was ready to call it that? Was it the steps outside that Lincoln Park house? Two people sitting shoulder to shoulder in the dark, finally saying out loud that they had been grieving the same thing from opposite sides of the same silence? Or was it something quieter than any of those? An old man learning the word for purple from a child he had 45 minutes left to know. Tell me in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. These stories travel further than I ever expect them to, and every location you share reminds me why it's worth getting them right. If this story moved something in you, if you believe that truth is worth going after yourself, that love doesn't ask permission before it recognizes itself, that the most important families are the ones built deliberately, one honest choice at a time, then subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and leave me one word in the comments, just one, that describes how you feel right now. I'll read every single one.